dear Savior's birth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. A thrill of hope, the weary world
Beautiful song, isn't it?
rejoices,
Just take it
for
in.
yonder
I want to get to that moment we're all waiting for right now.
a new and glorious morn.
Some of you are singing like you can't help it.
Oh, hear the angel voices. Oh, night divine.
That's it right there, right? Whether you can't wait for Christmas music to come into your life as you celebrate, it's not Christmas, by the way, it's 4th of July weekend, but whether you can't wait, like that's an iconic song, beautifully performed across the world. It brings out this melody that was originally put together, and we see people over and over sing it. And welcome today to our series, Oops. We didn't get Brittany singing Oops. I did it again today. I thought I would class up the song a little bit. For this reason, though, I think this whole summer collection of talks, the whole idea around Oops is that Jesus has left us an irresistible way to live. It's not easy, it's not simple, it doesn't just fall into our lap, but it's this invitation to take every aspect that's meaningful in our lives and to put it into his hands. So our great winnings and our great moments of sorrow can all be trusted in this ethic and way of life of Jesus. And so he's left us a song. Maybe that's the point. He's left us a song. And when you hear the song, you recognize it, right? When that comes on, if you've heard that song and your spirit's lifting, you're like, oh, that's the song. But here's what happens sometimes. Here's the problem. Sometimes we take the song that Jesus has left us and we do our own version of it. And it doesn't work the same way.
Oh, holy night, the stars are brightly shining.
This isn't me, by the way.
It is the night
It's probably better than me.
of our dear Savior's birth.
It's not the same song.
Long lay the world in sin and error high,
Same words, same melody.
till he appeared, and the soul felt its worth. A thrill of hope.
Let's take a few more seconds of this.
World rejoicing, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. Oh,
Right, so oops, the whole idea in this series is that there's a melody, there's a song, and it's beautiful, and when you hear it, you know it, and that's who Jesus Christ is. That's what he's left us. That's what the call to the church is. Welcome to Eastwind Community Church this morning. And it doesn't matter if you're passionate, doesn't matter if you know the melody, doesn't matter if you know the words, you can still misrepresent the song. And when you put, that's about 12 years old when it showed up. It made its rounds. And some of you on your probably family text threads every Christmas, it shows up. But it brings us into the idea behind basically our oops today. And the oops is like, what are some faith ideas we grab hold of that seem to make sense? And these might not be for all of you, but they're ones that have come and gone in my life. Faith ideas you grab hold of that maybe we should let go of or maybe we should forget. And today it's oops, you shall not judge. I put the exclamation point on there for emphasis because this is, if a few years ago they did a study of sort of like what's people's perspective of Christians, and many of you are followers of Jesus. You're Christians, and there's others in here who are seeking, or you have questions, or you got dragged in today. But what's someone's perspective of Christians? And do you know almost upwards of 90% of people said, my issue with Christianity is Christians are so judgmental. Now, they didn't say they're not judgmental. I think what they said is, based on the teachings of Jesus and who he seems to be, their lives are way off the mark. And I think it's a fair assessment. It's a fair assessment of my life from time to time, and you put all of us together, and you go, yeah, sometimes we miss it. And so this idea comes up. Jesus said, do not judge, and that's the problem. You shall not judge. Someone who has no familiarity with the Bible, that might be the Bible verse they feel the most comfortable like quoting. Like, isn't that what the whole thing's about? You shall not judge. And so I look around at the world. There's some, obviously I love commercials because I bring them up a lot. Maybe this is a caricature or a way to present it. Just a few 30-second snippets to look at how, like, don't judge, don't judge.
Hello. Well, how much are they asking?
Well, that's a lot of money for a deck.
Well, I hate to tell you this, but you're getting robbed. Did you hear me? You're getting robbed.
Don't judge too quickly. We won't.
Look at the cute dog.
Don't judge too quickly. We won't.
Hey, kid. You got to get down. Come on.
Don't judge too quickly. We won't.
Saturday, so I could be able to go home tomorrow.
Daddy's gonna be so excited.
That killed him.
It's an idea that we wrestle with. I wrestle with how judgmental should we judge? What's judging mean? What did Jesus mean when he said, you shall not judge? And we're going to jump into his teaching on that and kind of the context through where it takes shape. But first, I have a question for you. And so if you join us on a Sunday morning, we always have a few questions for our folks online. You can message in the chat about it. But here's the question. Who's the most judgmental person you know? That's not the question. Actually, the question is, on a scale from 1 to 10, how judgmental are you? So a little self-audit here. If you were to say, all right, 1 to 10, and like, how judgmental am I? Turn to the person next to you and just say like, or ask them, no, don't do that right now. It'll ruin the morning. At lunch, ask them on a scale from 1 to 10. Right now, just assess yourself. No judging others right now. Assess yourself, and we'll be back in a minute. We're going to explore these words from Jesus. I think our conversation this morning makes the most sense if we come in sort of with I want to be self-aware. I want to learn about how I can live and move and be amongst my neighbors, my friends, my loved ones, my enemies. How can I thrive? And I would say, if you want to thrive, then you want to follow Jesus, because following Jesus will take every aspect of your life and it will align it and put it together. And so I like to hear you laugh about judgment, because honestly, most of us don't normally. Either we experience like the pain of it, or we're kind of carrying the weight of just finding ourselves going there all the time. And I think when we talk about being judgmental, often isn't it someone else that most of the time it's someone else that comes to mind. Like, who's the most judgmental person you know? It's almost always a problem for somebody else in your family, somebody else at work, somebody else in your life, somebody else online. That's their problem is judgment. And we might even go, I'm not judgmental, I'm just right. Like, right? Like, that's how we feel sometimes. We're like, I'm correct, I'm right. Jesus is going to talk to all of us this morning. And I was thinking about, like, this idea, like, I don't even mind telling people I'm right because that's good for them. And I was thinking about this. I go, okay, so what am I judgmental of? And I honestly, like, for whatever reason, LeBron James, like, pretty lighthearted, but I'm super judgy of everything LeBron James does. And I thought, why is that fair? I don't even know the man. It's about the whole Cleveland Warriors series that happened years ago. And then I decided, I go, what else am I judgy about? If you don't appreciate the Fast and Furious cinematic universe, I feel like I don't understand why you haven't given it a shot. It's fantastic. It's hours of meaningful entertainment. And then I paused and I went, you know what, though? There's actually some other things that are a little more serious that I'm judgmental of. Right now, I feel really judgmental of lazy people. I don't know why. I don't even really know lazy people, but I'm just like, they're out there somewhere, and they're a problem. That's how I imagine 7 billion people in the world. I'm sure a large chunk of them could be considered lazy right now, and I'm feeling like they're the problem to what's going on in the world. And I found this one, I thought, and this is so self-righteous of me, especially as a pastor, that I'm really judgmental of people who carry the name of Jesus publicly, but they wound people with that. Like, if you look at the consequences of the love they carry or the name of Jesus they carry, it's just like people are laying on the ground beat up around them. And I feel really correct and right in judging those people who do that, who carry the name of Jesus publicly and use it to wound people. And then I thought, and you know what? And this talk about like circular reasoning. I'm really judgmental of people that I think are judgmental. And that's kind of how this whole thing works. And the problem with the oops of like, do not judge, I don't think any of us really go there because we all do judge. But we might say like, this is the problem. Like, Jesus, this isn't the way of Jesus. Judging isn't the way of Jesus, but I don't think he lets us off that easy. And that's what we're going to explore today. And you know, sometimes actually when I find myself judging people, I can go as far as to picture Jesus like, with his arm around me, being like, good job, Carlos. Like, way to stand up for me. You go get him, Davidus. You got one more round, buddy. You got this. I can have this self-dialogue with Jesus. Maybe you're not as bad, as messed up as I am, or maybe your mind doesn't go to those places. But what I want to gently propose to us this morning is that this message, the Jesus message about judgment, might not be for somebody else who's judgmental. It might be for us. It might be for you. I know it is for me. So we're going to jump in. We're going to explore that. We're going to look at where Jesus says, do not judge. And he actually says this in something called the Sermon on the Mount. And it's worth studying your whole life if you haven't. And you can read different accounts of it in the different Gospels. These are the stories of Jesus' life. The Sermon on the Mount is where Jesus kind of sets the record about who he is and sets the record straight about what he's come to do. And in Matthew chapter 6, you might be familiar with these blesseds. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek. 5 and 6, he kind of lays this out. But in 7, he goes into all these specifics. And one he's going to talk about is judgment. So he's got this whole audience listening to him. And he's got everyone down. He says, do not judge. I firmly believe in my experience, I've been a follower of Jesus for over 2 decades, that people who look at the church, they know this verse, they can quote it at you. And they'll say it like you'll say it, we'll say it like, do not judge. That's Jesus. Do not judge. He goes on to say, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. We're going to read the whole text and then we'll come look at it in parts. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? And then he goes on, you hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. See the whole context of the story as it unfolds? Jesus says, don't judge, or the way you judge, that's going to be exactly how the world works for you. And then he goes on to say, before you do, be self-aware and deal with yourself before you actually in community begin to work towards the wholeness and the health and the healing of people around you, in your family, in your immediate life, in your neighborhood, in your life group, and on and on. So we're going to kind of walk through this. Just some observations as we begin to explore. One is, and I hope you see it right away, because maybe you've grabbed hold of this idea. Jesus isn't prohibiting judging. He's also not giving license to just judge away. He's using a word we're going to have to explore. What does it mean to judge? I've got all sorts of props to talk about that. I'm not going to smash fruit up here and juggle or anything, but I've got some things I want to roll through. And so Jesus, the word he uses, there's a word that we don't use much anymore, censoriousness, but you can hear the root in it. Censoriousness, the censor. Okay, that would be like the extreme usage of the word Jesus says for judge. Don't be censorious. Stop censoriousness, this idea that you look at someone else and they need to be muted. Their life needs to be muted. Their words need to be muted. Their social needs to be muted. So take that idea. We're going to bring censorious to a much more applicable present time word. But Jesus does not say don't. So we've talked about being a critic and being a cynic here. That a critic is somebody who loves something and wants it to be better. Believes it. Like if you're a critic of O Holy Night, that second version, you're like, I love that song. That guy ruined it. A cynic says, oh, Holy Night's a horrible song. It's a horrible song. Cynics just walk around saying stuff that builds nothing up and is probably partially true, but they have no love for the thing they're speaking of. Jesus isn't saying that we cannot be critics, so I'll get into that, but he is saying, but you cannot judge. What does he mean by judge? And so this command, it's not going to, and it's my concern in some ways, especially as we deal with significant, both cultural, personal, interrelational events over and over and over in our lives, and we will continue to. Things that impact your life, impact the lives of people you love, impact the lives of people you don't love. That whole mix when it comes together, that Jesus gives us this invitation that maybe there's a way. Maybe there's a way to live, and it's not easy, but he's going to unfold how it would work for us. He's going to teach us how to judge. So I guess today my goal is I want you all to be judges, but really, really healthy, life-giving, Christ-centered judges. There might be something good in that. So do not judge, and we can see its core word we'll get into in a second here, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you'll be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. This word, Jesus uses a word that doesn't help his audience until you follow the whole story. It's a word with tons of meaning. It can go all the way to a judge with a gavel, like guilty, do not judge, all the way over to discern. And that's what I want to kind of explore with you. So if you could think about it this way, do not judge. I've got a bucket of apples and oranges here. Come grab a snack after the message today. And when you look at this, there's two ways you can go about it, but it all has the same action. You have to sort. Judging involves sorting, okay? So I'm going to judge right now. Okay, orange, apple. Apple, apple, orange. I mean, you all can see what's going on. It's pretty straightforward. I am discerning the difference between these two things. So this is an apple, and I've got some more oranges. Oh, that doesn't go there. Different color, different texture, different fruit. So I'm going to keep on separating, discerning, get my apples over here. They're not washed yet, so make sure you wash one before you eat it. The oranges you don't have to wash. And so I have effectively judged what was happening here. I've discerned. This is the process. This is a word picture for this idea. Do not, but so then what happens? Well, there's two things you can do. I can say, I have discerned. I have judged. These are apples. These are oranges. I'm not making a value statement. I'm not making one's better than the other. I'm simply stating that based on a series of qualities and characteristics, These aren't the same thing. The other end of the spectrum would be to go, you know what? Oranges are better than apples. I hate apples. You know who else hates apples? God hates apples. Like so think about it. Here's a great graphic from this idea that kreno means simply to separate. So there's this spectrum of judgment. And one understanding would be to use your wisdom and your relationships, your community, the scripture, the word of God, your life experience. I'm going to discern. Apples are not oranges. I've done a discerning work. Or the other end of the spectrum, censoriousness, which we'll get into, to condemn. I hate apples. I wish there were only apples or oranges. I wish I never had to see another apple again in my life. Like think about the extremes of this one word Jesus uses so we can say apples are not oranges or apples are less than oranges. Of course, God hates apples. Death to apples. And so when Jesus says do not judge, he's giving us a context to say, friends, I'm not telling you, because he's going to go on to tell us to judge. He's going to tell us how. He says, I'm not telling you not to live a discerned life, a life of thoughtfulness and wisdom. Just think about this. Should I do this? Is this good for me? Is this unhealthy for me? Should I say this? Should I hear this? How should I respond to this? Should I purchase this? How should I approach this person who's wounded me? These are all discerning moments in a human's life, judging moments. Same word. But censoriousness, to condemn, that's a different approach altogether. And actually, judging is, Jesus speaks of it, and Paul in the epistle speaks of it often, that it's a way to live. So what if we spend our energy and our time seeking, how can I live the most discerning, the most healthily judging life possible, and kind of reject the do not judge, do not condemn, but please discern. Do not condemn, but please discern. And before you discern, because the way you judge is how you'll be judged. So if I'm going to judge through condemnation, Jesus' invitation is you're going to feel that in your life. You're going to experience that in your life. You're actually going to put yourself in the role that's only reserved for God, because he's set apart. There's a word for God. He's holy. He's righteous. He's not like us. And so he sits in the seat of judge. The rest of us, our life is a life of discerning, how to live according to the will and the way, the care and concern of that God. And I was kind of thinking through, if you want a quick and easy test to think, am I discerning or I'm condemning? If you're discerning, then you tend to be thinking about something. If you're condemning, then you've probably shifted your focus to someone. Someones have a lot of some things, but they're not their somethings. So if you're discerning, you're thinking about something. You're condemning, you have shifted your attention to someone, and Jesus says it's like a boomerang. You whatever you do, it comes back to you. It's not an introduction of karma. It's this idea that if you throw it out, so I'm going to throw condemnation out at you, I hang around, what's that condemnation going to do? I almost forget it's coming back. I'm moving on with my life, and all of a sudden, wham! It's like a boomerang. And so he moves on then. He goes, do not judge, because if you do, you'll be judged in the same way. My argument would be he's saying, do not condemn. And then he's going to turn and he's going to teach us how to discern. He says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? Jesus does this all the time. He introduces an idea, and then he can see, he knows people they're going to misunderstand. So he then brings in a story or deeper teaching to help them sit in it. Let me take the speck out of your eye when all the time there's a plank in your own eye. You hypocrite. And this is the key operating word. First. If Jesus didn't intend for us to live discerned lives, then he would have said, you hypocrite, never or always just take the plank out of your own eye and never remove the speck from your brother's eye. Listen to his words, though. Look at his words. First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. So he starts with this kind of picture of an outcome, like let's make sure that we're not censorious. Do you know what word has landed in culture in the last decade that I think captures condemnation better than anything? And everyone carries some anxiety about it or frustration with it that I've talked with. I've talked with my kids yesterday about it. I said, is this a thing in your life? They said, yes. Yeah, I don't even understand it. Cancel culture. Cancel culture is the full outcome of saying you're an apple, you were once an apple, you're not an orange, you are, versus something, you're someone who should be canceled. And we're living, now we mostly see it in our movie stars and our comics and our politicians, but we feel, and everyone knows intuitively, wait, who set this system up? Who set the idea up that something I said or did at some point in my life would be the defining thing for all of my life, my opportunity to contribute? Dave Chappelle talks about Bill Cosby. He says Bill Cosby committed horrible crimes and so did some horrible things, and he should pay the price for those. And he goes, but the outcome of that has been Bill Cosby's life is basically a waste. Everything he did was fake. And Chappelle stops and he says, but what a lot of people don't know, I've tried to fact check this, it's hard to get to the full details, but he goes, but what a lot of people don't know is that Cosby paid for the equipment, or as part of supporting the equipment that Martin Luther King Jr. used to give his I Have a Dream speech. He had early money and he was funding that. It's an interesting idea. So a speech that was groundbreaking for the civil rights movement and brought about justice and goodness was potentially supported by someone who has committed horrendous crimes and should pay the price for those crimes. Condemnation makes us say, I hate apples, versus apples aren't oranges. And so cancel culture is the new version, maybe the new expression of a world that's trying not to judge, but is full of judgment. So Jesus jumps in and he says, you hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And the second thing I see in the text, if the first thing I see is that judgment is not to condemn, the second thing I see is that condemning judgment is always hypocrisy. And he gives us I really think Jesus' audience was cracking a smile when he said this. This is just a piece of pallet wood, but he says, take the plank out of your own eye before you take the speck out of someone else's eye. So, you ever got a speck in your eye? It's the worst thing, right? And you're trying to get it out. And if someone's with you, what might you ask them? Hey, can you help me get, and it's like you pull your eyelid open and they come over and they're fishing around with their finger, right? It's a thing. It's a thing. I don't know if you should do that. Optometrists speak knowledge to this thing. But Jesus says, friends, first take the plank out of your own eye. And everybody listening's got this imagery, right? Sorry, I've got glasses on here. This imagery. And they're like, oh, come on, Jesus, you're crazy. It's like, do this before you. So I'm going to walk down here. Alex, we both have glasses. So if you had a speck in your eye, you're like, Carlos, give me a hand. Or if I was like, yo, Alex, you have a speck in your eye. Come here. Let me get that. Why are you putting your hands up, Alex? Don't you want that speck gone?
I do.
Okay, he does. So come on up here and let me get that speck out of your eye. Right? But this is the imagery Jesus gives. What are you doing walking around with this thing? You're trying to help somebody when all you can do is hurt them because you are not self-aware and discerning. You are not taking care of what's going on in your heart and your mind and your life. And so he introduces this picture, and it's a beautiful word picture because just think about how ridiculous it is. No one really has a plank in their eye. How do you measure plank? Like how many bad things do you have to have in your life for it to be a plank? How big is it? Jesus isn't focusing on that. He's saying, look at the system. If you're going to rightly discern, if you're not going to judge, if you're not going to condemn, if you're going to know how to live life, then first learn how to take the plank out of your own eye. And then look at the consequence of that. And then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And so I kind of have a discern test for us as I think about this text. It's a pretty straightforward 5 or 6 verses, and it's consistent with Jesus' life from start to finish. He meets a woman who's been dragged out of her home, caught in the act of adultery. Some people who are within their rights and within the law are about to stone her, kill her with rocks to death. And Jesus says, hey, whoever has dealt with the plank in their own eye, any of you who has no sin, you can cast the first stone. And what do? If you know the story, one by one, they drop their rocks and they walk away. There's still one person left, though, Jesus. And there's one person left who has no sin, Jesus. And so he picks up the stone. No. And he kneels down with her. And he says, who's left to condemn you? She says, nobody. Who's left to judge you? Nobody. He says, neither do I. But then he gives her this really interesting line. But I want you to go and sin no more. It's basically saying, but now go and live a discerning life. Do the work and the time and the effort of figuring out what is life-giving and what is healthy and what's not, and how can I take advantage of this second opportunity I've been given. So Jesus, he's consistent through and through he's not just walking around going, hey, don't judge, I don't. Saying, learn how to discern and do not condemn, because I don't condemn. You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove. So here's the traps I think we can fall into. One's just canceling others. And I'm using that word on purpose because it is a word with meaning right now, and it gives all of us a feeling, I think, unless we're the ones who are actively engaging it. Canceling others is not what Jesus is calling us to. That's the trap, and man, we step into that. The other is excusing ourselves. I just watched The Pelican Brief. It came out in 1993. Have you ever seen this movie? Denzel Washington, Julia Roberts. The movie starts with people protesting outside the Supreme Court. And it could be a live feed from 2022. Not a thing's different. Of course, these are actors, and people are angry. And there's a communal rage. And somehow we think, even if we're right, that canceling others and excusing ourselves, and that those are two ways to get to a better way. So then we fall, but some of us know that's not right. So we go, you know what? I'll do nothing. Because I would do nothing, I can't do anything wrong, right? That's an approach. That might be an approach I would default to. I also think that's a trap. Jesus doesn't say, do not judge the plank in your own eye, just let it be, and don't worry about the speck in your brother's eye. It's deal with the plank and then the speck. So here is, if I was to start with the oops, do not judge, I would end with discern well, and here's the test as Jesus lays it out. A handful of things that can help us judge. First, he says, take the plank out of your own eye. Examine ourselves honestly. Start with yourself. And I want to give you an encouragement. If you take yourself and you begin to consider the goodness and kindness and wholeness and perfect God who loves you deeply, who you don't measure up against, who your actions, your deeds, your thoughts, your community service, whatever you stand for, if it's done, if you are examining yourself and you don't bring God into that equation, I think your examination is going to come up short. It'd be my invitation to you. Sit with God and say, God, I want to examine myself. What do you see? What do you want to say? There's a psalm where the psalmist says, search within me. That's a great way to start that prayer. Search within me, God. See if there's any way, anything within me. Examine yourselves honestly. Start with take the plank out of your own eye. But then we keep going. The goal of this process is restoration, because Jesus said, so Alex, back to when I was trying to get that speck out of your eye, right? The whole thing is I can see Alex is struggling. His eye's watering. Maybe he's not dealing with it. I'm like, I want to help Alex. I want Alex to see clearly. My goal is restoration, but to get to restoration, I have to begin by examining myself honestly. I want you to not have to deal with this thing that's constantly aggravating you, that's affecting your life, that's blurring your vision, and probably affecting your ability to discern. So the goal is restoration. We want to judge so that our family, our community, our loved ones can see clearly. Now, here's a really important distinction Paul makes. 2 Christians, he says, you have no business judging people who aren't in the church. Now, just let that settle in real quick. 2 Christians, the Apostle Paul, writing letters to the early churches, he says, you have no business judging those outside of your community. Your business is with your family, spurring each other on towards right living. That's a heavy word to say, because I think we all have a lot of business judging everybody everywhere whenever it works. And so the goal then is restoration. And it begins, if you're part of a Christian community, if this is your church home, that's our goal. That's what, when I'm preaching, I'm thinking about that in my own life and your life. I'm hoping we can become more like Jesus through our journey. The goal is restoration. The third thing is operate from a place of relationship. Notice that when I was trying to get the speck out of Alex's eye, it was a relationship. Alex, I see a speck in your eye. Can I take that out? You're like, no, you have a plank in your eye. This doesn't feel safe. But the whole thing was relational. I'm just not walking around finger swiping your eyes. Like that'd be a horrible experience. Or let's say, mid-sermon, eyes work a lot for me to think about this. Mid-sermon, you're kind of in the front row. You're a guest 2 weeks in a row, and all of a sudden I see your eyes start watering. Now, George, I don't ask your permission. I'm just like, see George's eyes watering. He's got a speck in his eye. I just come on down, grab your head, and start, like, what do you think about me in that moment? Not very good thoughts. You're like, this guy's not for me. This guy's crazy, and he needs a restraining order, right? You operate from a place of relationship. Operate from a place of relationship. I'm going to remove the speck from your eye, and you can trust me because you know me as someone who has examined myself honestly, and I really just want restoration for you, for me, for our community. I honestly want to change the story of what people think and who people think Christians are, and I want to operate from that place of relationship because you're not a system, an idea, an organization. You are a person loved by God, and I want to mimic and model that love, and so then I patiently pursue partnership. And Jesus doesn't say these words, but it's articulated in the story. First, remove the plank from your own eye before you remove the speck from your brother's eye. In order to remove a speck from someone's eye, they have to agree, let's do this together. Let's sit down, let's do this together. I actually know it might hurt, but I know it's necessary because if you do this, I'm no longer going to have this thing festering and frustrating and bothering me. So you patiently pursue partnership. Have you ever gone to somebody to try to restore things and they don't want you to remove the speck? That ever happened? And so you double down and you're like, no, you're wrong. You need this speck removed. And then they say, oh, thank you for pointing out how wrong I am and how I need you to fix me. That's kind of how we work. That's why Thanksgiving and Christmas get so odd within our families. Patiently pursue partnership. What's your goal? Are you just the great speck remover? Or are you someone who really wants to see your brother or sister and community made whole? Couples, spouses, parents, kids, this is a really great way to think about the operating system in these relationships. And then we get down to second to final, work with gentleness. Now, you hear this whole list, and some of it just feels like, yes, but there's stuff I've got to stand for or fight against or in this world, right? But I just want us to sit with the teachings of Jesus. He knows that. He's not shocked that the world's broken and full of destruction and harm and death. And in that space, he goes, here's how you live. You're going to work with gentleness. Listen to Paul rephrase Jesus in Galatians 6. He says, brothers and sisters, so he's talking to those in the church. If someone is caught in sin, destruction in the relationship between them and God, destruction in their internal sense of self-destruction in their peer relationships or just how they view the world. If someone's broken a broken system, caught in that sin, and they're acting out on that sin, he goes in, he says, you who live by the Spirit, you should restore that person gently. Now, if you read Paul, you know the guy's a firebrand. He's intense. He goes hard to the point of his death. He's willing to fight through any wall so that people can hear about Jesus. And that same man with his intensity who stood over the execution of Christians at one point says, if someone's caught in sin, you who live by the Spirit, notice it's an internal term. Those of you who have received the Spirit of God, who have the self-awareness of following Jesus and the Holy Spirit is transforming and shaping you, you should restore that person gently. Focus your time and energy there, not trying to restore the world that hasn't really asked you to come restore it. Work with gentleness. And then proceed with wisdom. And Jesus does something really interesting. I left a verse off, and some of you who read ahead were like, oh, no wonder it's weird. Oh, I don't know what's Jesus again. He's talking about dogs, and he's talking about pigs. So let's take a look. Jesus ends this discourse. He says, do not give dogs what is sacred. Now, before you get all offended for your dogs were different back then. They didn't live in homes. They didn't have collars. They didn't sleep on your bed. You didn't give them surgeries. Like, dogs were animals on the street. And you didn't like dogs. You didn't like dogs at all. They just scavenged around and maybe they bit you. And so he says, don't give dogs what is sacred. He just finished saying, don't judge or you'll be judged in the same way. He uses that word that has this broad range of meaning. Then he turns and talks about a life of judging. You hypocrite, take care of the plank in your own eye before the splinter in another eye. Then he says, do not give to dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. And he's closing a teaching moment. He's saying, time out. In case you thought that I didn't have an expectation and a desire and an invitation for you to live your life with wholeness and health, to follow my teaching and to follow Yahweh, follow God. In case you thought what I was saying was, it's all just just go for it, God's love. In case you thought that's what I was saying, he ends with a wisdom statement. You don't give these mangy things scrounging around on the street. You don't give them what's important to you. You don't throw pearls to pigs. You don't chase pigs around. No one could even afford pearls listening to Jesus. You don't chase pigs around and try to put pearls on them to dress them up. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. And wow, that clears things up, right? Here's what Jesus is saying. He's saying a judging life is a discerning life. It's figuring out what's an apple and what's an orange. It's finding what's the best way to live and move and breathe and be. It's a life where you don't just, and we see Paul echo this when he says something like, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. It's trying to help people understand. There's a discerned, judging way of living. And then there's canceling and condemnation and the spectrum that leads up to that. So he ends with this parable. Everyone listening. He goes, you're going to have to discern. You can't give dogs what's sacred. You can't throw pearls to pigs. Focus on taking the plank out of your own eye and then the speck out of your brother's eye. That's the process. That's the judging process. It's in your notes. I hope you'll take a look at it. I want to end with a question, then we're going to head out into our weekend. It's a prayer question or a reflection question. I'd love for you to just sit for a moment with Jesus. Talk to God about this. How can I practice being in non-judgmental presence in our world? Maybe how can I discern more and condemn less? We heard Paul say, those of you who have the Spirit, so there's a spiritual invitation to follow the Spirit of God. How can I practice being a non-judgmental presence in our world? And how can I discern more and condemn less? And then we'll say our benediction. We'll head out to our weekend.
Well, I ain't worth much, my face is far too common. You could stack me up, still I'd be forgotten.